koi carp. The year when the Sino-Japanese War ended was a long time ago. Of course, this was when I was still a young man. One summer afternoon, I went to Mukajima with 5 or 6 other people. We had heard that there was a good river fish restaurant near the Ohashi Bridge in Senju, so we decided to have dinner there, and went to Senju just as the sun was setting. We went to Senju at dusk. It was not a big restaurant, but it had a good old-fashioned atmosphere. We were ushered into a 6-tatami room on the second floor in the middle of the restaurant and ate in the cool breeze. I don't drink alcohol, so I drank soda water. Some people drank beer, and some drank sake. One of them was an old man named Kajita, who drank sake as if he was licking a teapot cup. He was not much of a drinker, but he loved sake. There were many young people at today's meeting, many of them born in the Meiji era, but only Mr. Kajita was born in 1872, so he must have been 62 at the time. Mr. Kajita was a very energetic old man and always walked with the young people. Many old people are shunned by young people, but Mr. Kajita was an exception and was well liked by everyone. In fact, I had invited him to join us today. "Let's go to a river fish restaurant in Senju," he said. When I suggested it, Mr. Kajita did not object. Mr. Kajita didn't object and followed me obediently. When we went upstairs to eat, we decided to have grilled eel, and various river fish dishes were served while we drank. Since it was summer, we also opted for a carp wash. Mr. Kajita was talking cheerfully as usual. He seemed to be drinking a lot. He did not put a single chopstick in the carp wash. "Kajita-san, do you not like carp?" I asked. "Yes," the old man replied, "because carp are a little muddy. All fish in the river are like that. Still, you can eat crucian carp and catfish, but apparently only carp." "No, actually, it's not just the smell." Kajita's face darkened a little as he tried to say that. Kajita knows the old story well. Seeing that the old man looked somewhat worried and hadn't put his chopsticks in the carp wash, I asked him again, "Is there any reason for that?" "No." Kajita-san laughed. "I shouldn't be talking about this when everyone is eating so well. Let's talk about it some other time." However, at the urging of the others, Mr. Kajita continued his story. He wanted to hear the old man's old stories for tonight's entertainment. The old man actually liked to talk, so he finally agreed to talk, but his expression showed that it was not a very cheerful story, so he naturally changed the way he listened. Since it was still a long time ago, electric lights were not used in the stores around here, and there were lamps in the tatami rooms. There was a small branch river flowing under the second floor, and 2 or 3 fireflies were flying in the darkness of the river where reeds and wild strawberries grew thickly. I'll never forget that moment. It was the spring of my 20th year, so it was March of 1858. Even though it was March, it was the lunar calendar, so the weather was completely spring-like. New Year's Day was cold with 3 days of heavy snowfall from January 16, which was rumored to be the heaviest snowfall in 10 years, but by mid-February, the cold had abated and the world suddenly felt the presence of spring. At that time, dredging of Shinabazu Pond in Shimatsuaya had started, and crowds of people were gathering every day because they could catch big carp and crucian carp. A little time passed, and on March 3rd, the day of the Dolls Festival, I caught a tremendously large carp. It would have been nice if I had caught it during the May Festival, but there was nothing I could do about it during the March Festival. The place where I caught the fish was a moat in Asakusa, which may not be recognizable to people today, but it was located along Kakuaya Bridge near Shimoya. A carp flowed out of Shinabazu Pond and fell into this riverbed, so the locals found it and made a big deal out of it. This could be the master of the pond. What should we do? They caught it, but it was so big that they had trouble disposing of it. If we leave it like this, it will go out to the big river. But then again, no restaurant would buy such a big fish. Before the debate could be easily settled, a large crowd of onlookers gathered to hear the rumor. A large crowd of spectators gathered to listen to the rumor before the discussion was easily settled. From among them, a young man emerged. I've never seen a carp like this. He was the second son of Mamoe Yajiro, a bannerman who had a house in front of the Asakusa Gate. He will turn 23 this year, but he doesn't have a regular job and is playing around. He was looking at the scales of a large carp glistening in the spring sunlight with his hands in his pockets, when he looked back to his left and right and asked, "What are you going to do with this carp?" "Well, I'm consulting with you." "What is there to consult about?" "Eat it up," Yajiro said bravely. The crowd looked at each other. "It's good for sashimi, too," Yasuburo said again. The others did not reply. Everyone knew how to cook carp, but the fish was too big and creepy to kill and eat. Seeing the timid look on his face, Yasuburo mocked him. "I've eaten snakes, frogs, cats, and rats before. No matter how big they are, there is nothing wrong with eating them. If you're afraid of being cursed, give it to me." Whether skinny or withered, he was the second son of a bannerman, and the neighbors knew his face. The neighbors knew his face. They spoke ill of him behind his back, calling him cold-hearted and annoying, but they refrained from doing so in his presence. But to give a carp to the second son of a bannerman was shameful. As the crowd looked at each other again and hesitated to respond, a white-faced woman came out of the crowd again. The woman called out to Yasuburo, "Oh, master, what are you going to do with that carp? Are you sure you want to eat such a big one? It's delicious. Please leave it to me." The woman lived in a town where a man named Bunchi, a master of the Jibanshu school, lived, and the geisha, Yasuburo, usually went to the master's house. The woman, who was a couple of years older than Yasuburo and reputed to be a heavy drinker for a woman, started laughing when she heard that. "If it's that good, you can eat it. But it would be a pity to take it just as everyone else has caught it." The woman had asked people to sell these carp, since she was having trouble getting rid of them and the person she was asking was the son of a Hatamoto. Everyone agreed and she was able to exchange one of the carp for money. The woman brought the money from home and paid for it in front of everyone. However, it was impossible to carry such a large carp when it was jumping around, so in order to kill it on the spot, Yasuburo pulled out a small sword from his waist. "Oh, wait a minute." The man who called out to him seemed to be a respectable merchant and was accompanied by a young apprentice. The voice was a little late, and as soon as he stopped, Yasuburo's blade was already touching the carp's neck. Nevertheless, when the voice called out to him, he turned around. Izumaya? Huh? Why are you stopping me? It's too cruel to kill such a magnificent thing. Killing? Today is the anniversary of my beloved Buddha's death. Please don't throw a party to celebrate. Izumaya is the ticket office in front of the storehouse. The owner, Sanamon, stopped by here to beg for the life of the carp. The Momoi family is indebted to Izumaya. When the owner of that house asked him to help, Yasubiro couldn't keep quiet. Not only that, but the talented Sanamon quietly put some coins in Yasubiro's bank. Then, one red carp suddenly turned into a lot of money, and Yasubiro gladly accepted it. However, the carp was decapitated by the first thrust, but being a sturdy fish, it was unlikely to go down with such a wound, so Sanamon instructed his servant to take it somewhere else. Then the old man took a breath. That young servant was me. I was only 20 years old at the time, and I was amazed at the size of the carp. I even thought that I was really the master of Shinibazu no Pond. There is a big temple called Ryuhaji on the edge of Shinbori. Old man Kajita explained that this was the family temple of Izumaya, and that he had saved the big carp on his way back from visiting the temple. The carp was a resilient fish, and after receiving a single blow, it did not falter. There is a large old pond in the temple, so the injured fish were released there. The carp did not seem to be weakened at all, but swam freely and eventually sank to the bottom of the water. Sanamon returned home happy that he had done a good deed on the anniversary of the Buddha's death. However, he was disappointed when he heard that the carp had died and floated away around midday on the 4th day of the following month. The pond at Ryuhaji Temple was quite large, but the initial injury must not have saved the carp's life. He had no choice but to resign himself to the fact that he had passed away in the garden of Buddha, rather than being viciously mutilated by the second son of a violent bannerman. Furthermore, a suspicious rumor arose. The 3 men who caught the carp alive were Sakichi, Mohei, and Yujiro, servants at a lumber yard on the Shinbori riverbank, Shichizo, a plasterer from the neighborhood, and Takusuke, a barrel maker. That night, 5 of them began to suffer, and Sakichi and Takusuke passed away around dawn the next day. This was the same time that the carp had died and floated away, so the rumor spread quickly. They were said to have been haunted by a carp. Some people explained that they must have been hit by some kind of food, but the general public did not understand. It was decided that they must have been killed by carp. The other 3 were lucky to survive, but even so, they could not wake up for 10 days. Sanamon was also distressed by the rumor. In the end, he became the owner of the temple and built a mound of carp in the temple. It was a custom of the time, and I don't know who started it, but it was said that if one paid homage to the mound, one's prayers would be answered, so there were many visitors every day, and flowers and incense were offered in front of the mound. On April 12th, the 49th day of the month, the temple held a puja. It is said that the 7th anniversary of the death of a carp is unheard of, but on the day of the puja, there was a huge crowd of worshippers. All the employees of Izumaya went to help. Mr. Kajita was also forced to work, and he gave away carp-shaped sweets to the visitors. Since then, Izumaya Sanamon has stopped eating carp. Not only the owner, but also the people in the store stopped eating carp. In fact, Mr. Kajita said with a slight frown on his face. I don't feel like eating carp anymore after seeing the damaged appearance of that big fish. We asked, so, what happened to Yasuburo-san and Monji-san? I asked. Of course, the story doesn't end there. The old man continued. Yasuburo Momoi was overjoyed to have unexpectedly come into possession of a large sum of money, and he said it was because of his master. As I said before, Bunji was a heavy drinker for a woman, so the two of them drank in a good mood for about half a day, and whether they got drunk or just thought about it for a while, they developed a strange relationship. In other words, it was like a match made by a carp. Originally, Yasuburo was a carefree man, but his carefree ways became more and more violent, and eventually he was expelled from his home. However, since they both drank alcohol every day, the master's income was not enough to make ends meet. Since such a man had come into the house, the good disciples gradually stopped making donations, and the internal testimony only became more difficult. Yasuburo began to behave like the evil samurai seen in the play, borrowing money and extorting money. The koi incident occurred on March 3, 1931, and on June 23 of the same year, the world was suddenly turned upside down with the arrival of Perry's black ships in Shimoda, Aizu. Some of the expulsionists were, of course, serious, but there were also many who used the name expulsion of barbarians as a pretext to commit evil deeds. Among them were the second and third sons of small noble families and vassals of Yasutoshi. Yasuburo was one of them, and he and several others conspired to break into the homes of wealthy townspeople wearing black masks and clothes of all sizes, and asked them,